Episode 281, Lee Camp.
Lee Camp, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for being back on. I really do appreciate it. I'm kicking off my 10th season currently and having a lot of guests on who've been on before. And last time that we spoke, we were talking right after RT America had just shut down. And I know that your library of content, your show that had gone on for many years, was just deleted. So I kind of wanted to just check in on that, see if that content ever got recovered, and just if any other revelations came out over the last 2 years about the closing of RT America.
So yeah, 2.5 years ago, I'll refresh some people because I know not everybody follows the play-by-play. I had a TV show for 8 years called Redacted Tonight, weekly comedy show, kind of like a more left-wing daily show. And then 2.5 years ago, RT America, the company that produced the show, was completely shut down, and that includes all of RT America, which had, Jesse Ventura and all these other people, Chris Hedges. And basically within a week of that, the YouTube channel with Redacted Night was banned around the world, as was the Spotify. I had my own Spotify podcast, but it was playing Redacted Tonight content, so that was banned around the world. And so I've recreated a lot of these things. I have a new YouTube channel, youtube.com/moment of clarity. I have a new Spotify, The Lee Camp Show, and a new podcast called Just Comedy. We can talk about that later. But in terms of the content, in terms of Redacted Night content, so technically I can still log into the back end of the YouTube of that channel. It will, I'm certain, never be shown to anyone ever again. So there's no real reason to have the channel other than I do have a way to download the content, and I could put it somewhere. I assume if I start putting it back up on YouTube, they'll probably ban the new channel.
Could you put it on Rumble or somewhere else?
Eventually. Yeah, I could probably put it up on Rumble. The other thing is but there's also a question of timeliness. It's like people may want some of the old Redacted Tonight, but if it's me talking about Bernie's election chances, who knows how much they want that. And then a lot of the content is on Odyssey, ODYSEE.com. But it is rather hard to search there. I haven't spent that much time on it, but it's not like you can just find the whole season back to back or whatever. So it somewhat exists out there, but the banning of the channel around the world is truly offensive. And obviously this was done with there was no appeals process. There were no warnings. There were no strikes. It was just gone. And I hear YouTube's doing that to more people, this week. So.
Well, I did want to just talk about the subject of censorship overall, because over the last several years, the censorship has been rampant, not just things like RT America getting taken down, but everything around COVID, the allegations around the 2020 election. We can go back even, before that with Russiagate and the hysteria there. A lot of channels were getting taken down and demonetized. So it's been happening for several years. However, it seems as though there's been a little bit of a pushback against that, with Elon Musk purchasing Twitter and rebranding it as X. Nominally, that was done for free speech reasons. Again, Rumble has a lot of different content on there that isn't allowed on YouTube. You recently, kind of relatedly, had Julian Assange finally getting freed from prison after being held there for years. So do you think that there's been, a substantial positive move in the direction of, against censorship? Or do you see these all as sort of like limited hangouts and not really substantial changes?
I think some of them are attempts at substantial changes. I think things are more suppressed and censored now than they were 5 years ago, even with some of the, even with the somewhat rise of Rumble. I'm on rumble.com/Lee Camp, and I was live streaming mainly to there for at least a year and a half. But Rumble has the ruling elite are making efforts to go after all of the platforms, including the likes of Rumble. I mean, if you just look at the ones that were slightly more free, you had TikTok, which is now in the process of being forced to be sold to investment bankers like Steve Mnuchin, U.S. billionaires that will play the oligarch game. and censor whatever. But even before that, I started using TikTok for about 2 months last December, and I was banned quickly because I was just speaking out about Gaza and the genocide there and everything. And there was no warning to me, no strikes, no appeal, no nothing. It was just you can't log in anymore. And this was even before the sale, or before the proposed sale. So it's like these platforms, many of them are trying to kowtow to the censorship, even if they might have some sort of policy against it to some degree. I'm not saying that about Rumble. I think Rumble's still fairly free, but there are efforts. I know Rumble's already been banned in France. I think there's efforts to ban them in the UK. They're a Canadian company, and I know Canada's made some efforts to kind of make it more difficult for them to have their business. And so the question is, will they be able to continue operating? Then, of course, you just have advertiser boycotting of places like Rumble, because most advertisers are they're all connected to 4 or 5 companies or whatever, and those are the ruling elite of America. So these advertisers don't want to associate with the uncensored platforms. And then to speak about X, it's like, or Twitter, it's like, yeah, Elon Musk brought it because he claimed he wanted more free speech. And then he gets it, and now he has actually agreed to more censorship from government entities than Twitter did before he bought it. I'm not saying certain aspects of X maybe are a little more free now, but he's actually allowing for more government censorship than before he bought it. And that's because he wants to stay in those markets of these other countries. And then you also have the fact that he's making it pay to play, where if you don't have the $8 check mark, $8 a month, then you are going to be seen less. So taking free speech and making it pay to play is offensive in its own regard. So yeah, it's like all of these things, all of the things that pop up to get around censorship, they then go after. So, and I'm not saying don't make the effort. We should all keep making the effort, but people got to be ready for every once in a while, the old Southern boy comes out of me. The people got to be ready for for them to come after these entities, as they're created. And it goes for third-party political entities. It goes for anything that's going to rise up and challenge this horrific status quo that seems to be facilitating genocide, facilitating ecocide on every level. And if you're gonna go up against it, be ready to be attacked and sidelined. And then you have things even worse, like Richard Medhurst being arrested in the UK and imprisoned for in a full day, and they're threatening him with years in jail, basically for his journalism, and that's been done to other journalists and other activists as well in the UK.
Kit Clarenberg, I think, was stopped at the airport and questioned for several hours.
Yeah, it used to be that the maximum was 5 hours if they weren't going to bring charges, and now they have some new statute that allowed them to hold Richard Medhurst in a cell for 24 hours. So it's changing. It's getting worse.
Well, just to play devil's advocate, we had a story about a month or two ago about Tenet Media, this company that was founded by Lauren Chen and her husband, and apparently there was connections there to RT officials, to the Russian government, and they were paying these conservative influencers to produce content, and seemingly very large sums of money for content that wasn't even being viewed that much. Obviously, this is one isolated example, but it's pretty prominent example. There's people like Tim Pool involved in this, and these pretty notable conservative influencers. So doesn't this kind of vindicate those claims that Russia was trying to secretly influence American culture? And just what are your thoughts on Tenet Media overall?
Well, a few things. One is I don't know how much of this is true yet, because I don't, I believe the FBI as far as I can throw them. And I haven't been working on my bench press recently. So I don't know how much of this is true. I assume some of it is, but I don't know whether it goes back to Russia or not. But let's just, for the sake of argument, say that it does. One thing I want to make clear is the 2 RT employees that they mentioned that were somehow the ones facilitating these payments. I was at RT America for 8 years. I never met or heard of any of these people at all. I don't know whether they were there. I don't mean RT America, but RT International. I don't know whether they were there when I was working there or not, but they had no connection that I'm aware of to RT America. So these are completely different stories in that regard. So I think to take something that we still haven't seen all of the proof of, but to take something and say that, oh, it proves Russiagate from 4 years ago or 6 years ago, to me, that's laughable. And I've seen some mainstream journalists attempt to do this, and it's a pathetic attempt to say, oh, that Russiagate thing that would completely collapsed and every aspect of it has been completely debunked and most of it laughably debunked. Now it's been vindicated. It's like, even if Russia a year ago decided, okay, we are going to do the thing that they accused us of that we didn't do before, and now we're going to spend $100 million, trying to manipulate Americans, that still wouldn't prove the Russiagate from years ago. So to me, it's laughable to connect the two. As for this current one, I don't really know. I don't know like how much content these right wingers altered to do what.
Well, according to them, they didn't even know that there was any kind of connection to Russia, right? It was Lauren Chen and her husband who supposedly would have been the ones who knew.
Yeah, and they're Canadians who were right-wing commentators before this, right?
Right.
I think. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
Hey Radicals, I hope that you're all enjoying this interview. As you know, this is the start of my spectacular 10th season. This is going to be a big one. We have lots of big returning guests, lots of new guests as well. So really want to make sure that it's great. Please do help support the show if at all possible. You can do that in a few different ways. You can like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me across all different social media networks. And also, if at all possible, please do consider financially supporting the show. You can do that at patreon.com/Primo Radical. When you become a patron, you can submit questions to all of my guests, so please do consider that. That's only $1 a month. Please also consider sending super chats and super thanks, and make sure again that you're just following me across all different social media networks. Thanks again, folks, for the last 9 years of support, and again, I'm looking forward to making this a great 10th season. Well, just shifting gears a bit, talking about the news. So, the big story over the last year, but really last several months, has been Israel expanding this war. Initially, it was against Gaza, and more recently, there was these pager attacks in Lebanon, and then there was the assassination attempt that the assassination that took place in Tehran, and more recently, you had Iran finally attacking Israel, and we keep hearing about there's an imminent Israeli response. So obviously, things are just heating up, and it seems as though we may be on the precipice of World War III here. And, obviously, if Iran and Israel start really going at it, that would, involve the U.S. really facilitating the attacks on Iran. But, I don't know if this means we could actually see U.S. troops getting involved, fighting with Iranians. So I just kind of be curious to know your overall kind of thoughts on where we stand currently with this. Could the U.S. be getting involved again in the Middle East in a very significant way? Is Israel going to keep expanding the war? Obviously, they've been bombing Lebanon. They've been bombing Syria. So just, where do you think we kind of stand with this currently?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much there. I think that first and foremost, especially since we just recently saw a year since October 7th, I think everyone needs to remember that this is absolutely a genocide, and that word needs to be used. And this is the accurate definition. If you look up the definition of genocide on the Holocaust Memorial Fund website, as dictated by international law, you will notice that Israel is checking off every single box of committing genocide right now in Gaza. And that just people need to repeat that and know that this is not, in terms of the Gaza aspect, this is not a war. This is a genocide. This is a mass destruction of a people. blowing up their entire society, and even down to trying to genocide, cultural genocide as well, such as bulldozing the cemeteries in order to cut any ties to the land, bulldozing and destroying hospitals and schools, and every aspect of life and culture that could have existed or did exist in Gaza can no longer come back. That is the goal of Israel. And I think we need to be really clear of that. And for those who have fallen for the Israeli propaganda that you can't believe these things, you can't call it a genocide and be Jewish or be sympathetic to Jews. That is not true. I am Jewish. I am an anti-Zionist Jew, and there are millions of us around the world, and Israel does not equal Judaism. And that is such an important point that people need to know. There are more Zionist Christians in America than there are Jews in the world. So Israel has worked very hard to make people conflate Judaism with Israel, and we need to break that in order to understand what's actually going on here. To get to the broader implications, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't see what's next, but I can tell you that Israel has shown day after day after day that they are pushing for more and more war. They want more land. Netanyahu believes the only way he's not in prison is to stay in office, which means to keep wars going. But also they're trying to, make sure the U.S. is as involved in this as possible. Not that the U.S. has shown much stomach for not being involved. Literally, a shipment of bombs and missiles goes to Israel every 36 hours to rain down on children. And at any moment, don't kid yourself that, Biden or Harris or whoever has tried, but they just can't get Israel to do the things they want. One phone call and it would all stop. One phone call of the U.S. saying no more money, no more bombs, we're not shipping them anymore. It would all be over. So it's just laughable to think this isn't a U.S.-backed genocide. It absolutely is. Dropsite News just came out with that bombshell report showing that Blinken actually had his own office inside the head of Israeli military when he was over there. And he basically came up with the policy, or not came up with, but approved the policy of bombing aid trucks in Gaza and attacking aid workers. And more aid workers have been killed in 1 year than are killed in entire conflicts usually. So this is a U.S.-backed genocide and wars, etc. The other latest news in terms of what Israel might do next and to respond to Iran is that the U.S. is going to pay Israel, quote unquote, compensation, which means bribe. They're going to bribe Israel to only strike acceptable targets in Iran. Apparently, the U.S., if you read between the lines, is trying to stop Israel from going after Iran's oil facilities because that will cause the price of oil to spike, which could cause harsh economic ramifications for the U.S. But on top of that, most of Iran's oil, or a lot of it, goes to China. And if you cut off Iran's oil, then China will go to Russia, which will make Russia more powerful. So there's various reasons the U.S. does not want that. The other thing is Iran can cut off the Strait of Hormuz, which would be catastrophic to U.S. oil and energy around the world. Iran is not Iraq, and people need to understand this. Iran is a very powerful, large country. Is it 60 million people or more than that? It is not going to be easily taken down or collapsed or something like that. And so, but even former CIA director Leon Panetta just said that if Israel goes all out, if Israel basically says we're just going to see how much destruction we can cause to Iran, then you could absolutely see World War III. It is going to be an all-out war. Iran's going to respond accordingly. The U.S. is going to get more heavily involved. It could all spiral very quickly, and I think everyone is hoping that doesn't happen. And I'll just remind Americans, I think because this is so far from us, people forget that it doesn't matter whether your quote unquote side, your team is winning or losing. War is repulsive. War is disgusting. War is children being blown to bits. So it doesn't, if oh, yay, I was rooting for Israel and they got in some good strikes against Iran. It's still just children and innocent people being blown up daily. And so to sit there and go, my side, my team, like you're waving a phone number one hand, this isn't sports. It's murder. It's disgusting. It's repulsive. And of course, Israel is also murdering hundreds of thousands of Gazans with disease and famine as well, which was part of the goal. That's why they blew up all the hospitals, because they wanted disease and famine to kill Gazans. And it's killing more Gazans right now than even the bombs are, which is not easy to do. So this is all by design, and everybody needs to be boycotting everything they can boycott. We need to protest in all the ways we can protest. There's great boycotting apps where you can easily look up what products are connected to Israel. And I think it's called like Disoccupy or something is one of the apps. But yeah, we all need to do what we can. Yeah.
And you said with one phone call, the U.S. could put an end to this. I kind of wonder if one individual person within the U.S. government even has the capability to do something like that, including the president, just given that so much of our government has been taken over by AIPAC, right? Like both parties, the majorities of both parties are completely controlled by AIPAC. All of the presidential candidates from, both parties going back for decades go and speak at these AIPAC events. And, I just kind of wonder if Biden or Harris really took a strong stand against what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in the Middle East. They would just be removed and the rest of the war machine would move against them. So is one politician, even if it's the president or a very prominent politician, even able to do anything at this point, or has the government really been kind of captured by AIPAC?
Well, this is this debate some people get into as to does the U.S. control Israel or does Israel control the U.S.? The U.S. empire is obviously far larger than Israel. Israel is a piece of it. And I think without a doubt, if you really look at it, it's Israel that, it's the U.S. that controls Israel. Now, Israel has the ability, you're right, to get just about any congressperson withdrawn, to wreak havoc on a presidential election with the amount of money that is given to these candidates. But, various people in high levels have called Israel an unsinkable U.S. battleship in the Middle East. And I think that's what it is. It's so beneficial to the United States to be able to commit war and crimes from Israel as opposed to trying to do it from the sea or do it from Europe or something in the Middle East, that it's a mutually beneficial thing. And Netanyahu is basically an American. He grew up in Pennsylvania. He went to MIT. He worked at Boston Consulting, where he became good friends with Mitt Romney. Changed his name, changed his citizenship. Netanyahu is essentially an American, and it's America that controls Israel. But that doesn't mean that the government isn't filled with Zionists. And by Zionists, I mean those who support Israel. As Biden proudly says, he is a Zionist. But, to me, it's similar to like, would any politician in their right mind right now in Congress speak out wholeheartedly against Big Ag? Probably not, because Big Ag could easily get enough money to sink any congressperson who did that. They give massive donations. They essentially own the Congress in that regard. But that doesn't mean that Big Ag runs the government. Instead, it is, big banks, big oil. There are members of Big Ag who are hugely powerful. But there's several issues where these Congress people are not going to speak out against it because of what it would mean for their careers, which shows how corrupt the whole system is. But it doesn't mean you have a cow in the White House,
Well, getting into the 2024 election, obviously this has been probably the craziest election cycle ever, just given, all of the different things that have happened. And first and foremost, President Biden deciding not to run, or basically being pressured into not running again, which hasn't happened since 1968 when Lyndon Johnson decided not to run again. Actually, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of an article that came out that's pretty interesting, calling these accusations that Biden was not going to be on the 2024 ticket, calling that a conspiracy theory that was being pushed. Obviously, as we know, what happened in June, they had a debate. And from my perspective, I thought it was a little suspicious that they had a debate so early, right? Because they're normally September, October. They had this debate in June before Trump or Biden was the nominee, but right after the primaries were over. And after pretty much during this debate or immediately after, the media really turned on Biden, even though for years they had been defending him, saying that he was very competent. But pretty much the second that the debate was over, it was like a memo went out and he just, was being called to step down constantly. And he did finally step down, and Kamala Harris was anointed without winning a single primary vote. Conservatives have been outspoken against this. Donald Trump has called this a coup. I think it kind of is indicative of that, just given how the dynamics kind of played out. I'm just wondering if, I guess, you agree with that, or if I'm being a little too conspiratorial.
I mean, here's the thing is, so you have I think the truth lies somewhere in between, although you're probably closer to it than pretending this all just happened out of the blue. I think the ruling elite is a tiny group. It's at the tippity top, it's a few hundred, maybe a few thousand, but really a few hundred individuals who, when they say something's going to happen, it's pretty much gonna, like, in behind those closed doors. I mean, even before the debate, I think that the ruling elite, as much as they thought that Biden could possibly be the fake suit in the White House that they pretended was running things, it was seeming like he couldn't even manage that. I mean, this also gets to the root. Sorry, trying to organize my thoughts here, but this kind of gets to the root of what of kind of how vacant the presidency is. Yes, the presidency matters some. I don't want to pretend it doesn't, but it doesn't matter to the level that people think it does. I mean, the military industrial complex, which we all know how pivotal that is, how much of the U.S. economy it is, how much of the world the U.S. is has their fingers in because of the military industrial complex, that goes on essentially exactly the same, no matter who is in that office. Trump tried to do some, and look, I hate Trump. He's a racist piece of shit, but Trump tried to do some weird stuff, such as, peace with North Korea, etc., and it all got crushed because you can't go outside of what the military industrial complex wants to do. So Biden was just a face. Kamala Harris is the new face of this entity. And yes, I do think that there was some coordination to get rid of the old guy that couldn't even speak right. But do I think, like, we had a president that the American people voted for, and now we have if Kamala Harris wins, we have a president the American people didn't want, and it's like, I think we've lost democracy a while ago. I mean, this thing is rigged by money. The two candidates that spend the most on the election win 100% of the time. The single candidate who spends the most on the election wins like 90% of the time. And that's just one of the dozens of ways this system is rigged. So I don't look at it as like a black and white, as a day and night. Oh, we had democracy when Biden was gonna run, and then we had a coup, and now Kamala Harris is running. To me, it's all just a sham. It's all theatrics. But was there some discussions amongst those who really make the decisions and the behind the closed doors as to getting Biden the hell out of the way? Absolutely, there were. And absolutely, there seemed to be some coordination with the media, even the liberal media, as opposed to like Fox News, after the debate was like, oh, never mind, he can't talk. Never mind, he sucks. And we were all saying, yeah, we said he's an old man who can barely speak for years. We've been saying that for years. Where did you just notice?
Right, and I was like, just all of a sudden, out of nowhere,
you just noticed this. It's ridiculous. And yeah, I also have been harping on the fact that Kamala Harris has received 0 votes for the position she was in, vice president, and 0 votes for the position she's now in, presidential nominee. And to be that far in these positions with 0 votes for either of those positions it just like screams like, oh yeah, we legit have 0 democracy. Like, let's all know that. Let's all realize that.
And obviously, with Donald Trump, there's just so much that we could go into with, how crazy this election has been there, from these assassination attempts. And, there's still not really answers about exactly what happened there. The second one, Ryan Routh, was a very bizarre example of somebody who went to Ukraine, and we don't necessarily know if he had connections with, or spoke with Ukrainian intelligence or military. But it seems as though, there's kind of the last few days, at least, in the betting markets, there's kind of a belief that Donald Trump is going to win. There's been, odds out of Pennsylvania and whatnot. Things have been shifting a little bit, and Kamala Harris's lead has been disappearing. I think some folks out there who kind of buy more into the Trump versus deep state narrative, they think, and given again the assassination attempts and how kind of weird they were, kind of think that even if Trump wins, they're not going to let him back in the White House. Again, I know your opinions on Donald Trump. You don't really think he's a great person, but what are your thoughts on kind of that narrative that they just wouldn't let Trump become president again?
Well, let me deal with the assassination part first, before the Trump versus Deeps. I mean, I guess they're related, but uh, so you got one assassination that very nearly worked, and then one that seemed like a complete crapshoot. I mean, this guy never even got a shot off. He's hiding at a fence and fails to do absolutely anything. Um, my kind of opinion about the actual the real guys like the CIA, etc., is that if they wanted to take Donald Trump out, I think he'd be out. Because I don't think it'd be. I mean, this guy eats cheeseburgers 7 times a day. I don't think it'd be that tough to fake a heart attack on this guy. So, I like the idea that they'd now. I think there are definitely a lot more questions about the one that nearly succeeded on the roof with all the Secret Service seemingly standing down, and I like there's definitely something to be analyzed there and figured out as to whether they could actually be that negligent to not cover a roof that is not even that far away when you're talking about sniper scopes. So I think there's something to be discussed there, but there could be assassination attempts at different levels. You could have assassination attempt where a few people at the Secret Service are trying to do this and they get people to stand down and there's an attempt. And then you could have assassination attempt at a higher level, which again, I think if the top level people wanted Trump gone, he'd be gone. I don't know that there'd be much way to stop them from doing such a thing. But to then get to Trump versus the deep state, all you have to do is look at his 4 years in power. How much did he do for America, for the average American? Fucking zero. Like zero. Like he giant tax cuts for corporations was one of the biggest things he achieved. Giant tax cuts for the rich. All these other things he promised, and this is the same with all these politicians. But was the average American doing amazing under Trump? Was it just changed their lives and everybody was doing great, and all of a sudden you had, great healthcare and great schools and great jobs? And no, it's like this guy is an absolute piece of narcissistic billionaire garbage. Both he and Biden have verifiable rape accusations against them, or minimum sexual assault. And so the idea that he's this magic figure that's going up against the deep state, to me, is it's a very laughable idea. Now, the idea that he was doing some things that the ruling elite who had largely had power before him didn't love, yeah, I think that's true. I think they didn't like the attempts at peace with North Korea. I think they didn't like when he said he was going to take the troops out of Afghanistan and then magically they got him to stop. I think they didn't like when he said he was going to take the troops out of Syria and then magically they got him to stop. But let's remember, this guy is not anti-war. He also bragged about stealing the Syrian oil. He bragged about how if he'd been president, we would have stolen more Iraqi oil. He also bragged about dropping the mother of all bombs, the largest non-nuclear bomb that's ever been dropped. He assassinated Iran's top general, Soleimani, while he was on a peace trip to Iraq when we're technically not at war with Iran. And it easily, who knows what the results could have been immediately afterwards. We could have ended up in nuclear war. So he's making some decisions that threaten the lives of all Americans, as are Kamala Harris and Blinken and Biden. And he's also made some decisions that went against the military-industrial complex, none of which got done. So I don't know. To me, who think he's somehow this great hope of theirs, is like, this guy has been a fraud his whole life. Everything he's ever said is a lie or fraud. He's had thousands of lawsuits based on not paying workers, not paying contractors. Like, this is a guy who is not interested in helping or facilitating the lives of average Americans in any way. which is what a dying empire vomits up. You know, we're in the waning days of a dying empire, and they're vomiting up these figures that are just complete frauds, complete snake oil salesmen and women, and they don't represent actual humans in any way. And it's theatrics, you know, and that's why I'm the campaign manager for a rock I found in my front yard, yardrock2024.com. And if you read it, the platforms on Yardrock's website, I think most people would agree with almost all of them, and he'll actually get it done. So.
Well, even, some folks who I guess do have some criticisms of Trump, what they will say is that he seems less hawkish on Ukraine. He may seem more hawkish on Iran, but he seems less hawkish in regards to the Ukraine-Russian war. Obviously, this is something that Democrats have been just really, insane about the last several years, even before the invasion, just with Russiagate and this fear mongering against Russia. And Trump has said that he will end the war before he even takes office. So I'm just kind of curious what your response to that would be.
I'd love to see an end to that war, absolutely. But to me, people are parsing hairs or something. Like he'd be slightly less belligerent on Ukraine. Meanwhile, he's as belligerent, if not worse, on China, which would be nuclear war if we were to push that. He's as belligerent, as warlike on other countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, as you mentioned. He is all for murdering and millions of people. So this is not an anti-war candidate. His first year in office, his Pentagon dropped 40,000 bombs. Obama's last year in office, his Pentagon dropped 28,000 bombs. So these are all war criminals. They're all murderous, unhinged, blood-soaked, disgusting. I don't want to call them human beings because I feel like that's an insult to human beings. So I'll say lizard creatures, parasites maybe. And so, yeah, okay, maybe he'd be a little better on Ukraine, but I think he'd be as bad, if not worse, on so many other things. So it's like, again, like with both of these parties, you get just more war, just endless war. It's unbelievable. Now, if there were a candidate that was like, oh no, I'm going to take the 1,000 U.S. military bases around the world and drop that number to 5, I'd be like, all right, that sounds like someone who's actually anti-war. Trump's not going to decrease the military bases, not going to decrease the military budget. The budget of our military, of our death machine, has gone up every year. It went up every year under Trump. It's gone up every year under Biden. Just keeps going up and up and up. These are not anti-war people.
Is there any candidate who you are supporting, whether that's Jill Stein or Cornel West or a socialist candidate, or are you just not going to be voting?
I have had all 3 on my live stream show, which is called Dangerous Ideas, if anyone wants to look it up. I've had Jill Stein, Claudia de la Cruz, Cornel West. I love them all. I think they're fighting for what is right. I think there are legitimate discussions about parties and ballot access, to say the Green Party has ballot access in far more places than Cornel West does. Fair point. If you're talking about whether you're on enough ballots to win or to cause a disruption, then I think that's a fair discussion. There's a fair discussion there. I think one of the more important things, and so I kind of endorse all 3 of those because I agree with them on almost everything, or most of everything. And I also think that as a third party, because you are not going to win, unfortunately, in our ridiculously rigged system, you're not going to win. I think the purpose needs to be to define ideas. And sometimes at various points here and there, the Green Party, but any of these people, has done a great job of that. Cornel West is an amazing speaker, and they can define ideas. I think all 3 of them have been important in speaking out against the genocide in Gaza in a very clear-throated way, to use the word genocide, to say this is horrific. They've all been great on that. And the Green Party came up with ideas like the Green New Deal, like the Medicare for all. And some of these ideas are then co-opted by the Democratic Party and then watered down so that it's something that corporations can get behind, which is not what should happen. But I do think it's a war of ideas, and each of them plays an important role. And one last thing, if people look up Vote Pact, P-A-C-T, it's this idea where if you are someone who was going to hold your nose and vote for Trump or hold your nose and vote for Kamala, the two, you find each other and you both agree you're not going to vote for Trump or Kamala, and you vote for a third party. Thereby, you don't impact the chances of winning of either Trump or Kamala Harris, and yet you support the Green Party. By the Green Party getting more votes, it can unlock certain things in the future, such as more funds, such as ballot access, etc., and it makes them a more formidable force. So there are millions of people across this country that are planning on voting for either Trump or Kamala Harris and holding their nose, and they don't like them, and they're like, I really don't like this person, but I'm going to vote for him because I don't like the other more. Those two people should find each other. And many of them are in your family, I guarantee. So find that person, that friend, that neighbor, that family member, do the vote pact, say, okay, I won't vote for Trump, you don't vote for Kamala, we'll both vote for a third party, and by doing that, we won't hurt their chances because you've countered your vote, but you will help third parties. And I love this idea. I think it's a way that people who actually wanted to vote third party but aren't going to could make a real difference.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And, even if we think more broadly just about the Electoral College, your individual vote doesn't really necessarily count in about, 40 of the 50 states. They're safe states either way.
If you actually look at like the number of swing states, and then really it comes down to a few thousand people in certain areas of swing states. So at the end of the day, you're talking a few million people out of 330 million or whatever, minus children, that are actually going to make this difference. And yet we act like this is a national thing and it needs to be talked about for 3 years straight. And it's like, it's coming down to like 2 million people are going to decide what happens here.
Right. So, I mean, in most states, you might as well just vote for a third party anyway, right? Because it's pretty much decided, like, if you live in California, Kamala Harris is going to win that state. So why not just give it to a third party candidate?
Absolutely.
But Lee, I did want to ask you, I did have one patron question, and for folks out there who'd like to support the show and also join in the conversation and submit questions to all of my guests, please go to patreon.com/Primo Radical. Only costs $1 a month. And this is from American Greg. Greg writes, what's the best way, in his opinion, to influence our members of Congress? Anything unorthodox or just calling their staffers, etc.?
So look, I've been an activist for a long time, and I've done countless marches and countless other things, and called people and back in the day, signed petitions and stuff. I now think that our system is so locked down, so corrupt, that just about, with some very, very few exceptions, just about the only thing outside of millions of dollars that influences Congress that can be done by average citizens is interrupting business as usual, is mass civil disobedience, is interrupting traffic, is getting in the way of their ability to get to Congress. Those are the type of things that actually have an impact. I remember when the fight for net neutrality was happening, and, there were millions of people across the country saying we need to keep net neutrality. And I think the thing that, ultimately it came down to, I can't remember his first name, but Wheeler was the man making the decision in the FCC. I think it came down to protesters sat in his driveway and made it so he couldn't get to work. And he ultimately had, after begging them to get out of the way or whatever for an hour, he ultimately had to take a cab or something. And I think it was when it got in his face and it interrupted his day, and that's when it had an impact. All the millions of petitions didn't matter. And that's where we're at now. It's civil disobedience is what actually has an impact. I mean, if you can stop an oil pipeline for 3 days, then that is an amazing impact. But if you call up your congresspeople and tell them you don't want the oil pipeline, never have I seen that have any sort of influence. And then you can also look at the studies, like the large Princeton study that showed that if something doesn't align with corporate America, then average citizens get what they want 0% of the time. And this is over thousands of issues they studied. It's 1,779 issues. And they found that unless it aligns with corporate interests, American people have zero say in what happens through Congress. And the only time they do, I think, is when you interrupt business as usual.
Well, Lee, I appreciate you being on the show today and going through all these issues. I know that you're launching a new podcast. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as people can hear in this interview, even though I'm a comedian and analyst, in a lot of these things, and a lot of my live streams called my free live stream every day is called Dangerous Ideas. It's not that funny. I don't spend that much time on comedy. It's a lot of analysis. However, I launched a new podcast that is just comedy. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have these topics, but it is comedy centric. That's aim number one. And it's called, wait for it, Just Comedy. So you can look up, it's on Spotify and all the podcast platforms. You probably have to look up Just Comedy with Lee Camp. Probably have to type my name in there, CAMP. But you can also get it, the link online at my Linktree, linktree.com/Lee Camp, LEECAMP. First 2 episodes are already up. And I'd love for people to check them out. And if you like it, obviously you can click subscribe or whatever there is on your podcast platform and be alerted to them every time. And they're free. So,
do you have a joke that you're most proud of?
I have a lot that I'm proud of. I had some pretty epic ones on one of my old albums called Pepper Spray the Tears Away. And there's some pretty good jokes in there about again, I had some I was proud of about interrupting business as usual. I was like, just do whatever you can to. If you have a job you hate, just fuck up their day. Slip a photo of your balls into the PowerPoint presentation. They won't know whose they are. And it's the same idea. Like, just find ways to gunk up this awful system, and that's why I liked it.
Well, Lee, again, I really appreciate you being on the show today and going through all these different topics. For folks out there who would like to follow you and support you, how can they do that?
Sure. I'd say the number one place to find all my links is probably linktree.com/Lee Camp, LEECAMP. And I'll just reel some of the things off. I have the new podcast, Just Comedy. I have another podcast called The Lee Camp Show. I have another podcast called Censored with Eleanor Goldfield. I have live streams 4 days a week right now called Dangerous Ideas. That's on YouTube and Rumble. And I have 2 books out there also. One's called Dangerous Ideas and one's called Bullet Points and Punchlines. And I'd love for people to just look up all this stuff, linktree.com/Lee Camp.
Well, thanks again. I really do appreciate your time and hope I can have you back on sometime soon.
Really appreciate it. Keep fighting.